Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 5th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Welcome to the Sermon on the Mount, where we will be listening to some of Jesus' best preaching for the next couple of weeks. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. I won't even have to write a sermon for these next couple of weeks. Jesus' greatest hits. That's what they're called. Now the Sermon on the Mount begins with these Beatitudes. That very familiar listing of who is blessed. The Beatitudes are a permanent part of the Epiphany season, at least in years A and C. A being Matthew, C, the one that we just got out of, Luke. We also hear the Blesseds on a festival day. And what day do you think that is every year? Take a wild guess. It's the same scriptures for a very commemorative day that we observe in November. All Saints. Good job. So we hear these this year twice. The Beatitudes are so beloved for reading in times of needed comfort. And they fit well in poems and songs and are often material for greeting cards and wall hangings and dish towels. What children's Sunday school room doesn't have the Beatitudes listed right next to the Ten Commandments? We know these lines well and can almost quote them as well as the Lord's Prayer or the Apostles' Creed. Now, two things that we don't realize about these words from Jesus are, number one, that we, the hearer, are included in with these people too. It's not just the person across town, the family we read about in another state, the communities that are suffering in Eastern Europe or somewhere else in the United States. It's not just our next door neighbor. This is about us too. The kingdom of God is near to us. We suffer and we are blessed. We don't realize, number two, just how countercultural these famous words were in Jesus' day as he led folks up the top of that hill to sit them down and feed them with the words of life. The Sermon on the Mount occurs in Matthew's scriptures just after the Spirit of God led Jesus out into the wilderness and he went up into a mountain, Matthew chapter 4, where he was tempted. He was tempted by the very sins that you and I are tempted by. Things like the misuse of power, the evil of pride, and the sin of doubting that God will take care of us, to name a few. Now, the background story of this sermon by Jesus goes like this. These were tough days on the planet Earth, and the Roman Empire was oppressive. And the evil one, speaking of the temptation of Christ, was not too happy that the light of the world had broken into the darkness. Isn't that just the way sin works in this broken world? There's always that oppressive grip that wants to ensure that the first are going to be first and the last are going to be last. And that grip is well ingrained in the fabric of our cultural structure today as much as it was in Jesus' day. It's called sin. We get so used to hearing mantras and songs and cultural sayings that incorporate first, last theology that we don't even realize what we are speaking and living out in our everyday lives, in our everyday practice. It becomes a habit. We like to think that we live in a world where those who mourn will be comforted, where those who are merciful will receive mercy, where peacemakers are looked upon as children of God by all. But in essence, the world that we live in can be just as oppressive in its lens of humanity as it was in Jesus' day as he preached this sermon. Perhaps in our lens of the way things go, people do get comforted. People do mourn and get comforted. People do get relief. There are people in the United States of America that do not get relief and do not get freedom from oppression. The poor in spirit, those who are chronically ill, those who live in constant states of bankruptcy, those who undergo persecution, all tend to be stigmatized in our culture. To speak the words and to live out the words, "You are blessed," is more powerful than you can imagine. To take the time and to prayerfully consider writing in a church's welcome statement that all are welcome here, and to display that prominently, and to remind others who walk by, and to remind ourselves of that very thing, and to remind ourselves that we may have a lens of how things are going right in the world, but that same lens others do not have. And we need that education to understand where others are coming from. All of that is more powerful than what I can even articulate to you. It's very much a Jesus thing to turn the world upside down and to do a 180 on our lens of things and to live out the first being last and the last being first. The prophet Micah also offers words that have become familiar to us. What shall the Lord require of you? What shall the Lord require of you? Do you know that song? To do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God. That's what's wrong with me leading music. That's what God is looking for as we strive to live as peacemakers and are merciful and hunger after righteousness, as we practice meekness, and as we walk through times of mourning and dancing, times of poor spirits and uplifted spirits. We are called to see the world around us and how we fit in that world with Jesus' eye. Seeing with the eyes of Jesus requires us to walk humbly down that pathway with him. Come and see. Follow me, he says to the disciples. When you walk that pathway, the world becomes upside down. And the way seems pretty foolish at times, as the Apostle Paul points out to the Corinthians. Imagine Jesus pulling those fishermen away from their trade and away from their Father who is in the boat, as we heard last week. Imagine them walking down that pathway, and the very first thing probably that they stumbled upon was somebody in the way of the path, somebody begging for mercy. A woman, possibly, this comes right out of St. Robin, by the way, a woman possibly in the pathway, laying herself down in front of Jesus and the disciples and saying, nobody will listen to me. I need help. She grabs a hold of Jesus' garments. And Jesus says, who are you? Where did you come from? And Jesus listens to her. And the disciples, I imagine, are like, we've got schedules here. We need to get moving. You've got a mountain to get to, Jesus. You've got some preaching to do. There's people waiting there for a service. And Jesus looks at this woman and he says, you are blessed. You are blessed. That, my friends, is looking at the world the way Jesus looks at the world. It sure seems pretty foolish at times, doesn't it? After all, we've got things to do, right? There's a certain way to run church. We got to move on. We've got groceries to go get. Somebody can't stand in our way. Somebody's calling us on the phone. Oh no! Don't tell me they've got another need. It's the way of peace. It's the way of shalom. It's the way that God intended things to be. God is pleased in that kingdom. God looks from above and says, shalom. That's the way it's to be. Blessed are you that God would come and live amongst us and look at us with God's eye, seeing that we are worthy to bear his name in the world. As I closed last week's service, blessed are you.